Steve. So what are you getting that's new? Anything?
Well, the last 36 days I've been on a tour of Australia, starting in Perth, and we finished up last night in Brisbane. Actually, not in Brisbane, Warwick, outside of Brisbane, about 2 hours. And it's been a productive time, and the interest in the subject in Australia is excellent, equal to the U.S., frankly, though it's a smaller population.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had good turnouts. We've had interest in the upcoming events and what's happening. So I'm enthusiastic about it, and I think made some excellent contacts down here. So that's the newest thing for Paradigm Research Group is a first-time visit to Australia and the interest in the many Australians for resolving this issue as soon as possible.
Right. So what do you think as far as the country as a whole? Are they more open to disclosure, would you say, or have they released more information than the United States?
Australia has held its materials very close, certainly closer than France or Britain or a number of other countries because of its close relationship to the U.S., particularly the relationship between their intelligence communities. There is a lot of cooperation involving facilities in the central part of Australia. And I think the Australian government has been aware of the ET issue, certainly from the beginning as well. So I don't expect anything shocking to come out of Australia for these reasons. But as you probably know, since 2000, we've had quite a few countries that are taking measures which are putting pressure on the truth embargo.
Mm-hmm. So what is your feeling as of late? Like, I know you've been doing this for several years, and do you think now is as good a time as any that the countries or some other country rather than the United States, or do you actually feel that the United States is going to come out first? What's your thought with that?
Most likely initial nation to make a move would be still the U.S. The truth embargo was initiated by the U.S. with the cooperation of its World War II allies. The Soviet Union and Communist China had their own reasons why they did not want the knowledge of the ET issue to be accepted as fact. So it worked out pretty well for the United States. But more and more countries are breaking ranks with this policy, and it now looks like the U.S. has no choice but to disclose, or another nation will do it for it. You have a disclosure race. There are 5 countries at the top of the list that could preempt the United States' prerogative here. The 5 include Brazil, France, the United Kingdom, Russia, and Communist China.
Mm-hmm. So, in my estimation here, with all the countries that are in the world, do you feel that it's going to be a larger country? Like you still feel that the U.S. is going to be the forefront in this thing? Is that right?
Well, it's a reasonable extrapolation. The truth embargo has been around a long time. The U.S. has led that embargo.
Mm-hmm.
While the other nations are taking some measures, they have not preempted the U.S. So it's a reasonable extrapolation to think that the United States will still be the initial disclosure nation. But that is not a certainty anymore. And we have to consider the possibility that one of these other nations are going to do it. I mentioned 5 leading candidates. The UN is not a factor, unfortunately, because the UN has not been allowed to become an appropriate international body. In my view, it was created during the Cold War and not reformed after the Cold War ended. It is I guess you could say, a stopgap measure that was created during the Cold War, which no longer is needed, and reform. So the UN's not there for us. So that means a country is going to have to start. The U.S. is the likely candidate, and until something changes, we will assume that the U.S. would be the first, which makes that Barack Obama, barring something dramatic, would be the disclosure president.
You know, one thing that you said is very interesting to me, and I never even thought about this, is all the countries in the world had a reason. I thought it was just a singular reason why everybody together as a whole did not disclose. But in each country, you had mentioned that they had various reasons depending on the countries. And can you go into that at all? Like, why would China want to keep that information from their particular population?
Well, that was the two embargoes had the good fortune that the two major non-Western powers, the Soviet Union and China, Red China, Communist China, had no real interest in revealing the ET presence because they're ideological control states. Their existence was based on a complete fidelity of citizens to the party line, the icons of the party, the leaders, what have you. So introducing the truth of an ET presence to citizens in such a situation was going to loosen that control dramatically. And so they had no interest in doing it. But ironically, since the Cold War has now been over 17 or rather 19 years or more, and the Communist China has become a major world economic power and has its own space program now and with satellites in space. It is encouraging UFO research. Sightings are going on. They're allowing the news of those sightings to make it out into the Western press. Something's going on there. Russia, on the other hand, the Russian Navy has announced that they will declassify their underwater encounter files. Quite dramatic. Russia is making an effort to bring the idea of a non-dollar-based reserve currency into play, and is discussing this with China. So these countries are in a much different place than they were in 1991 when the Cold War ends. And now they stand to benefit by being the disclosure nation, frankly. It will increase their aspirations to be world powers. The United States is a decline. And being a disclosure nation could be a significant move to help reassert U.S. moral authority. So there's a huge amount at stake geopolitically here. Mm-hmm. Can't even begin to tell you. And the irony of that, of course, is that the press, while it is starting to cover the UFO ET issue without question, still is not prepared to go into these matters, which, of course, where it really matters and really counts. And so the general public is not aware of this entire dynamic, by and large.
Mm-hmm. It's about a quarter after, Steve. Is there? Could you give the listeners your website and what they can expect to find on there?
PRG's home site has been, for the last 13 years, Paradigm Research Group. It is the main portal to PRG's 8 or 9 websites, I forget which. And they can find 10,000 external links there going to a whole host of researchers and other groups, recommended reading, recommended blogs, all this at PRG's main website, PRG. Or Paradigm Research Group's main website, PRG. So it's a good introduction. There are other sites, and almost any site that has anything to do with the political engagement of this issue is linked on that from those pages. You can count on that. So it's a good resource. It's not up to date. The site needs to be brought into a more contemporary style, but the information is there, and it's quite extensive.
So I know that you speak at conferences, and of course you're the creator of the X Conference. Is there anything that's coming up? Like, when is your next conference, whether you're speaking or whether you're creating?
It's a complicated situation now. PRG lost about $30,000 with the last X Conference that was held in Washington at the National Press Club, largely because the economy has just made it difficult for people to get out and do these kinds of things, and the attendance dropped off quite a bit. But the advocacy benefit of the conference was still there. So I've got to raise money. One of the reasons I'm traveling outside the United States, and will continue to do so through the end of August, is an effort to find backing for the higher level advocacy that needs to be done. And there's some promise that will happen. But should we find the funding, PRG finds some serious backing in the $60,000, $75,000, $100,000 range, then the next X Conference would be scheduled for roughly May of next year, and will be about contact. The whole conference will be focused on contact between humans and extraterrestrials. So that's one of a number of projects that are pending. There are a couple of, one particular event is coming up soon in September, which could be quite notable, and that is a press conference to be held at the National Press Club, tentatively set for September 27th, and it will be comprised of researcher Robert Hastings, Malmstrom Air Force Base Incident 67, Captain Robert Salas, retired, and some of the other witnesses, including those some up top on the evening that a saucer came down over one of the Malmstrom Air Force Base SAC sites, nuclear weapons silos, and turned the missiles off. Apparently they've convinced some of the security people to come forward, and so there will be a number of them, and they will be presenting the facts regarding that encounter, extraordinary encounter, and those witnesses will testify or give their background and history and so forth. So it could be a very powerful press conference that I think will really get the press's attention. So we're watching that develop closely and looking forward to that at the National Press Club, Washington, D.C.
And that's in the end of September.
Hopefully September 27th. They're trying to get some funding to ensure they can do this because there's a number of witnesses that have to be brought into D.C. This press conference will follow in the footsteps of the November 12, 2007 press conference that was backed by James Fox and Leslie Payne. They brought in a number of outside U.S. witnesses, a number of foreign military witnesses. It was a very strong event. You had the Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project, which held a significant press conference at the National Press Club in 2001. So this is in that history, in that tradition, and I think the press will be quite receptive to it, and I'm looking forward to that. There is a book out about that event in Malmstrom in the 60s called UFOs and Nukes by Robert Hastings. You can get that book. It's at the usual places. It's an important work. The intersection of this issue and our nuclear facilities is as important a testimony to the need to address this issue as you can imagine. And bringing that into Washington and bringing it to the American people and American press is going to be interesting to see how those maintaining the truth embargo at this time handle that. But it's going to be a tough one for them.
Right. Have have there been any individuals in Australia since you've been there, or any high-ranking officials that have come forward, even kind of to the side, and expressed any UFO sightings or anything like that since you've been there in Australia?
There have been a number of contactees that have come to these events. So I've heard some additional contactee stories, many sightings, of course. That's kind of old news now. The interest in the subject is strong, proportional to the population, which is only 22 million. Particularly in Brisbane, there was a great deal of interest in Brisbane and a number of groups forming in and about Brisbane. The Nexus Conference, which paid my way over and back to Australia, was quite successful with 500 people in the audience all 3 days.
Wow.
Duncan Rhodes published for the Nexus magazine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And it was I think the conference was about $300 Australian. So people were willing to come quite a distance to the Novotel Resort in Maroochydore, or near Maroochydore. So again, this reflects interest in Australia in the subject, and I think it's going to grow, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's pretty cool. I'd like to switch gears a little bit here, and just because you're in Australia, it's a cool opportunity to ask you. I'm sure you know about the BP oil spill and all that kind of stuff happening here. I'm not sure when you went to Australia, but have you been following anything on the internet or on YouTube or anything like that you're up on it?
I'm aware of the spill. I'm aware of the efforts to cap it. I'm aware of some of the speculations and theories around it.
Mm-hmm.
It is a classic case of corporate malfeasance in a deregulated environment in the U.S. And it deserves a lot of attention, but it's not clear to me yet that they fully know what's going on down beneath the ocean floor, the Gulf floor. So we'll see. But for now, it's quieted down, and they're trying to address the effects of that spill and the dispersant chemicals that were used. I don't think the Gulf is going to be the same for quite a while.
Right.
And another reason why, it just shows that the dependence on petroleum as a major and growing and expensive source of energy in the world is no longer doable. Mm-hmm. We've got to have access to the extraterrestrial technology of the saucers, the energy of which could replace oil and gas. So there's a huge amount at stake there, which I could spend quite a bit of time on. We don't have the time to go into that. But the connection between the truth embargo and the technology behind the saucers is at the core of the whole political movement.
Right. So that's why I bring it up. I mean, initially the listeners are probably like, well, what does that have to do with this? Well, I think there's a direct relation to it. And one other thing is, because you're in another country, I wanted to get how the people in Australia are perceiving what is going on with the oil spill. And are people asking you, or are they telling you what their opinion is towards Americans or towards the cleanup effort or anything like that while you're there?
There is an awareness and a sympathy in Australia for the mounting problems faced by the United States, without question. They are a little understanding that the U.S. has carried a heavy burden for many years and spent a fortune on the Cold War. Might have been avoidable, but nevertheless, there was a Cold War, and we ran that gauntlet. So, but ultimately, the Australians are powerless, I think, to do too much to affect the U.S. dilemma. China is in a much more significant role there. So I think in the end they'll just simply wait and see how it works out. There are strong connections between the U.S. and Australia, without question. Australia is clearly, I believe, involved in the UFO issue going back to the beginning. They have an ideal area. The center part of Australia is wide open for the creation of secret bases. I think there are some. I think there are also underground facilities that the public in Australia probably don't even know exist.
Mm-hmm.
Did not surprise me at all. But in any event, Australia is very connected to us. So they're not going to take any unilateral action. I would like to see Australia release its UFO files like Britain, Canada, and New Zealand are going to do or have done. But that remains to be seen. There is an election coming up. They're going to be cautious. Once that election is over, though, either Julie Gillard or Tony Abbott will be the Prime Minister. We may see something definitive come from Australia. So this is all interesting, but I can tell you that from outside the U.S., increasingly you have a world that is quite alarmed that the very bad policies that the U.S. has been following for a good, I would say 50 years, going back to the early 60s, has brought the U.S. to the brink. And there are plenty of people worried about that.
Mm-hmm.
And but I think they feel generally helpless.
Right.
The disclosure of the ET presence, particularly by the United States government, may be the only thing that could turn the situation around in the U.S. and prevent a major diminishment of U.S. power.
Well, that's what I wanted to get
at. And U.S. economy.
I really wanted to ask the question and kind of dovetail this all together. Do you think that due to this event, it will help promulgate the disclosure process due to the need or the necessity for the technology, and not just for energy itself, but maybe a cleanup process? Because once it's acknowledged that ETs do exist, or the UFO phenomenon and all that kind of stuff, I think that a snowball effect may be in order to, like, how else, as far as the technology we have, at least that we know of, could help clean up this planet, whereas maybe there's some off-world technology that may help clean the Gulf up, and of course the South and the East Coast even, as the way the Gulf Stream runs. Do you think that this may help in the disclosure movement?
The model that I'm working from has the military and intelligence managing committees that run this issue, whatever their name. And I believe that is still the case. I do not believe that they have privatized the management of the UFO issue. It's simply too important national security to put in the hands of some oil executives or some, I don't know, secret society. I just don't see that. I believe the consensus is to go ahead with disclosure, and they've wanted to for a while. They have not been able to get it done because they've been uncomfortable with the geopolitical circumstances and the leadership situation in the U.S. since George H.W. Bush lost to Bill Clinton in 1992. They, in other words, kicked the can down the road, but they had their reasons. But they can't do that any longer. I think they want to get this done. So I am under the assumption that they're going to contact the military intelligence community from deep down inside the secret empire. Is going to contact the Bush administration and come to an agreement on disclosing and also an understanding about what they would expect from the president as we go through this momentous occasion. So that's the model I'm working from.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I can understand that the consensus is not enough, that there's still some logistical issues here, and there's a great temptation to use whatever world event is going on, there's always something, and more to come, as an excuse to delay this. This is a big mistake now. If they do not disclose, the United States does not take the lead, you can count on another nation stepping forward and ending this, and resolving this matter independent of the U.S. And I think the consequences geopolitically are going to be quite substantial if that happens.
So give us a scenario, give the listeners a scenario, like say what would happen if another country comes out. Like what's the ramifications for the U.S. if they don't come out first?
Extremely complicated question. Again, there are 5 other countries that now are on the short list of those that would act ahead of the U.S., and as I indicated, they are Brazil, maybe I didn't, Brazil, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and Communist China. And the geopolitical impact varies dramatically between which of those 5 acts first.
Mm-hmm.
As I told the Australians, I think there's significant implications for Australia. China is the nation that, and I don't mean Taiwan, I mean Communist China, is the nation that steps forward to be the disclosure nation and the great truth teller to the world. The effect of that will be to further position China as the new world power, superpower. And they will have greater influence in the world. Brazil or France would have less impact, I think, on the balance of agreements and understandings. Russia would definitely have a dramatic impact, and Russia's world presence would increase, and that would be notable. The United Kingdom would be not too much of a problem for the U.S. I think the U.S. would follow very quickly as to be expected. But the one scenario, Brazil as well, but the one scenario is Red China. If Red China, which now holds a couple trillion perhaps of U.S. paper, with a double-digit growth rate, encouraging UFO research with their own space program, and of course a huge army of nuclear weapons. If China is able to make a decision to end the truth embargo ahead of the U.S., then we could very, very soon be in a situation where China tells a great deal of the world to jump, and the world responds how high. And that could include the U.S. and would certainly include Australia. So, again, if you're Chinese, you probably see that as a very positive thing. If you're not, you might see it as a concerning thing. There's a lot at stake here, but ultimately, disclosure is going to happen one way or the other. And long term, perhaps it won't matter that much, but short term, I think it will matter a great deal. I invite everybody to consider all of this as they make decisions about what they're going to do to resolve this issue. And in Australia, I think one of the things they can do is to immediately join New Zealand, Canada, and the United Kingdom and proactively begin releasing UFO files. I think that would be a positive step on their part. But so far we have not seen that. Though they do have an election coming up, and I don't expect anything until after that. Mm-hmm. Who knows? The winner of that election could join David Cameron, the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and indicate that they're going to release even more UFO files, and that would put even greater pressure on the truth embargo.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We can take some callers now. If you have any questions for Steve, or if you have any thoughts you would like addressed, give us a call at 1-718-664-9323. The number again is 1-718-664-9323. And while we're waiting for some callers, Steve, because you've been doing this for so long, and I'm sure people at conferences have come up to you in confidence and told you different things from various walks of life. I mean, we always talk about the UFO phenomenon, but little attention is brought towards the USO. And are you getting anything about underground bases and the USO phenomenon in addition, of course, to this UFO thing?
Well, regarding or unidentified submerged objects or unidentified, objects under the ocean, the most notable event in recent times is the fact the Russian Navy announced last July that they're going to start declassifying their underwater encounter files. I mean, that's highly significant in terms of Russia's status in this. Since the U.S., the Russian Navy would certainly not have said anything about this without getting the approval of Vladimir Putin. So that's notable. And I think some of those encounters are quite interesting. And we await the next move there. And not surprisingly, I think the announcement was, again, very much about sending a message to the U.S. that even Russia is tired of this truth embargo. Mm-hmm. So it remains to see what they actually classify, but still, the announcement was notable. In terms of who approaches me, I always hear stories. I've heard one the other night, which was significant, from an intelligence, former intelligence operative, or member of the intelligence community in Australia who had above top secret clearance. And they're all very revealing, but may never become formally out there. I think most notably, I continue to have contactees approach me. I'm not a researcher, but they know that we're trying to resolve this issue in large measure to perhaps end the uninvited contact that's going on and the forced contact is often recalled abductions. I think disclosure can bring an end to that, and they know that, and so they talk to me. And I hear more and more stories all the time. The number of contactees worldwide is probably in the millions, with most of them still closeted, but the numbers have come forward in the tens of thousands. Mm-hmm. Most of that, though, is private, and their accounts are in the hands of researchers around the world, but still, that's coming forward. I expect to see more contactees come forward and come out of the closet, and that number to grow. Mm-hmm. And we'll continue to hear more about these stories. And PRG is trying to get a conference called called Contact 2011, which will bring the issue directly to Washington, D.C., the contact issue in 2011. So I invite contactees to approach PRG, and we'll see what can be done to incorporate their experiences into the advocacy process.
Right. I thought it was important for you to tell that part because doing what you do with the disclosure movement, I'm sure people confide in you and tell you various stories that maybe the general population, like maybe, the general person might hear or have seen maybe something in the sky they didn't know what it was. Whereas you have, like you just said, you've heard thousands or millions of stories. So that puts you in a better position to say, you know what, this is the real deal. This isn't something that's like, maybe that was swamp gas or maybe that was a flare. You know what I'm saying?
Well, let's be clear now, Joe. I've heard hundreds of stories.
Okay.
Thousands have come forward, and millions are probably in contact. But I've personally only heard hundreds, but over the years, certainly more than 100, several hundred people have been talking about their contact experience. Mm-hmm. But it's not so unusual anymore for people to speak about this. I think the fundamental of this testimony that was developed and brought out by Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project and witnesses that are coming forward and so forth, and the witness conference by James Fox and Leslie King. These are out there and more than compelling. And while we want people to continue to come forward, we have more than enough evidence, more than enough material to end the truth embargo, to begin the post-disclosure world. So It's now really about convincing the mainstream media, which is getting very close to making a serious move here to start looking at all this and really putting it into play. And if they make that decision, well, the truth embargo will be over very quickly.
Well, that's what was my next question is, do you feel that the media is influenced or hushed, if you will, to say and go out even though they know some of these cases or they actually have footage?
Well, again, the containment of the U.S. media, particularly U.S. media, is critical to the truth embargo and not that difficult to achieve in the early days. As the Cold War deepened, I think the media's willingness to go along with the truth embargo was solidified, and the whole thing became almost institutionalized. It was just sort of, it didn't need a lot of tweaking, and the press, the reporters, the editors, publishers, what have you, just sort of knew that, well, you don't go there, and to a degree that would be considered appropriate. But that is changing, and the number of mainstream articles about this issue are growing. They're in the thousands since 2007, and at any time, there could be a breakthrough in any one of a number of media organizations where they would start putting out material that would be real problematic for a government-led embargo. And the government needs to understand that too. I mean, my preference is not to see members of the U.S. Congress and the Air Force, Defense Department being chased all around Washington, D.C. by packs of reporters on one of those media feeding frenzies, demanding answers about the UFO issue. But that could happen, and it's not going to be helpful. The U.S. government needs to proactively do this, and that's in the best interest of the people to have this be an orderly and proactive process. So. But nevertheless, we're pushing the media very hard because this embargo's got to end. There's too much at stake. So the ideal scenario will have to give way to whatever scenario gets the job done. The advocacy work is about disclosure. It's not about making the United States comfortable. And I want to make that clear. And the disclosure movement is now fully international. So somebody's going to have to make a decision in the U.S. pretty soon. That's all I can say.
Okay. So, let's go to the next level here. To dispel some of the fears that some of the listeners may have with all this, what do you see as a positive effect of disclosure? Like, say the media is like free to talk about it and to put the footage out there, and our government comes forward and says, okay, this is a real deal. What do you see like as happening first, and then maybe how it would snowball from there as a positive?
This is a very difficult question.
Well, because they don't want to do it. They don't want to make change because of fear. So to dispel that, I mean, and that's some of the reason I think is why the government in the past has not come out, because they don't think that the public can handle it because of the fear factor per se. So, I mean, if
I will disagree with that. I believe that this whole idea about the public not handling and the religion not being able to deal with it is mostly just propaganda.
Well, that I agree with you, but I'm just saying that
doesn't reflect reality.
Yeah, they say that. So,
well, no, they don't say what they say. No. What they say is that the UFO issue is not a threat, and we don't investigate it. And a report was commissioned in 1960 by the U.S. Navy that was primarily a propaganda maneuver to put out that kind of information that society couldn't handle it and so forth. And
right.
It drew on some of the work of Margaret Mead and cargo cults in the South Pacific. It was all a joke, frankly. But let's be clear. The public can handle the truth and always could. The truth embargo was instituted not by fear of the public not handling, but because at the time the ET presence exploded into the public domain. It had been around and it became an issue that had to be managed. The U.S. government was facing a Soviet threat that was going to be nuclear, and they knew it. They also didn't know much about what the ET agenda was and what that technology was capable of. They had vehicles, they had crash vehicles, they had opportunity to learn about them, and they just didn't think it was appropriate to get that out yet. It's hard to argue with their reasoning. And what happened is the Cold War just got worse and worse. And some people think the Cold War was a sham, but I can assure you those nuclear warheads were real. And I think at one point there were about 80,000 between the two countries. That's enough firepower to destroy the world, as most people know, many hundreds of times over. Mm-hmm. So this was a serious matter. The Cold War became the issue they were afraid of. Not the public handling the truth, but rather providing a huge new variable in the geopolitical reality that might increase the possibility that somebody would make a dumb decision and launch a nuke at somebody else. As the Cold War grew, the number of nuclear powers grew until eventually they included communist China, Pakistan, India, South Africa. Of course, Israel has had nukes for years, won't even acknowledge it. This is a very tricky situation, and they were concerned that while the Cold War was underway and these nukes were on high alert, could not risk it. And it's hard to argue against them. I mean, an intellectual case can be made that ending the truth embargo in 1947 would have been the best thing that had ever happened to us. But again, those making that argument didn't have to make that decision. So that is what is involved here. National security, Cold War, nuclear weapons, and ETs, that's the issue. The rest is a lot of myth and propaganda that is part of the truth embargo, which obviously distorted all of the reality of this in order to ensure that the public would not get resolved. And the public couldn't resolve it. And by and large, we really don't want to go through that again. We don't need this kind of governance anymore. And hopefully it's the last we're going to see of that, but that remains to be seen.
Mm-hmm. Okay, would you like to repeat your website one more time?
Sure, ParadigmResearchGroup.org, main portal. I'll be back in the U.S. on the 31st. I'll be leaving for the United Kingdom on the 5th. For about a 25-day tour out there, I'll be in Leeds, the Leeds Exopolitics Conference, September 6th, 7, and 8. And that's, you can find information about that at the Paradigm Research Group website, or you can just Google Leeds Exopolitics and get the information on that. Then I'm going to go speak in Ireland, near Dublin, and then down to London. I'll present there, and then go over to Leipzig and Budapest, and probably visit Malta in preparation for another conference that I'll be coming back to in October, a large conference on these issues to be held in Malta. So again, more developments in Europe, more interest, expanding awareness, all will lead ultimately to this issue coming forward in full measure.
Okay, I have a question for you that just kind of popped into my head here. You're talking about all these countries you're going to in different places. Have you ever had anybody try to stop you from doing what you're doing to get this word out?
No, I haven't. I believe that people have been interfered with, and I think that interference is now not happening. I mean, it stopped around late 1999. I still think there are areas that if people were to get into who could cause them to be interfered with. There are other subjects out there, besides the UFO ET issue.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these subjects, unlike the UFO issue, do not have an upside. I mean, they're just all bad. And bringing them out or dealing with them is going to cause a lot of problems and a lot of heat on some people. So there are still issues where if you go into, you're very likely going to find yourself toe-to-toe with some scary people. But the UFO issue is, I don't think, on that list much anymore. And I've never been bothered. I think the reason I've never been bothered is not clear why. I think, but my guess is that my approach has been one that I think they were far more comfortable with than some other approaches, and I think perhaps they liked the way that I cast this. I also made no efforts to act in secret. I made no efforts really to cover up what I'm doing or to misrepresent what I'm doing. So I've been an open book to them. And when you're an open book, of course, the government needs to understand this. I mean, the irony here is that the government, of course, needs to do exactly that. I mean, when you operate as an open book, then people are less fearful and less paranoid about what you're up to,
mm-hmm.
and are perhaps more willing to trust your intentions. That's the way I've operated. This is the way the government needs to operate. Barack Obama said he wants to do. He wants to see that, but we're falling away from that. But whatever, I've not been bothered, and I think it's also worth noting that the witnesses that have come forward, certainly going back to 2001 and the Disclosure Project Conference, the National Press Club, there are many of them. And there's virtually no indications that they are being bothered either. So the lesson from that is that those who know what's going on, and are involved in the management of the issue, I think are operating on the assumption that disclosure is imminent, and that the efforts to interfere with the processes, the citizen processes, would be very counterproductive. Mm-hmm. And that's the model that I have. Now, having said that, they may pull some stunt tomorrow, but again, that's my perception of the current status.
Okay. So how do you see things playing out over the next several months? Like, if you were to look ahead, what do you think is going to be happening here with the current trends and in your perspective?
You'll see more media coverage of disclosure-related matters, more media coverage of any phenomenology around the world. You will see more nations start releasing their UFO files. We had that very important press conference in September at the National Press Club. And hopefully the U.S. will start to, extricate, well, I can't do that, but the Obama administration might be able to get a little more stabilized. Right now it's in quite a bit of turmoil. We may not see that also. There will be more events. The process is now reversible, and you will see things confirming that. Recently we had two exobiology conferences, one in 2009 in November at the Vatican, and another in 2010 in January at the Royal Society in London. You might see more of that. More statements will pop up, like Stephen Hawking jumping into this thing a couple of months back. John Podesta, who I consider the linchpin person in all of this within the U.S. government, or dealing with the U.S. government, just wrote a foreword to Leslie Kane's book about the November 12, 2007 press conference and the witnesses that came forward. I think it's called UFOs, Government Witnesses, and so forth, and testimony. John Podesta wrote that forward. I haven't read it yet, but I'm sure it's quite provocative. Podesta, again, is a key figure in all this, and you need to watch everything he does very closely.
Mm-hmm.
So that book is just out. We'll see some effects of that. There's no prediction that there is going to be a ballot initiative voted on in November the 2nd in the U.S. And that's the Jeff Perkins initiative. That ballot initiative, according to the ET Affairs Commission, to create one, may very well just pass. And Jeff has managed to make it almost a national referendum, and there will be plenty of media coverage of that ballot initiative. All of this lies ahead. Frankly, I'm operating on the assumption that disclosure, formal acknowledgement by one nation somewhere, could happen at any moment. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if I woke up tomorrow and the news broke that afternoon. Again, we're right on the edge.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We have a couple minutes left. Of course, I want to thank you for being on the show, and we'd love to have you back. But is there anything that you would like to leave our listeners with?
Besides the facts on Washington.org, which is ongoing, and the desire to see people write the national press, the Washington Press Corps, with demands that they start asking the questions that need to be asked. That's all at FAX on Washington.org, facts on Washington.org. Another project about to be announced is we want to advance the exopolitical network worldwide by a new initiative that is really quite simple. We're inviting people to form exopolitics groups in their various cities, and then get those to be listed on the Exopolitics World Network site for their country. There are 22 countries now with sites, portal sites. You can go to exopoliticsworld.net and see that. But both in those countries and in other countries, we'd like to see people create informal exopolitics groups and call themselves exopolitics in the city name, exopolitics Leipzig, exopolitics London, exopolitics Los Angeles, exopolitics Melbourne, exopolitics. You get the idea. And we're suggesting this be without organizations, with no bylaws, no national overriding group, that it would be volunteer, and then you simply create and start meeting. There are scores and scores of documentaries and lectures on DVDs that they could show. We keep busy for years, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can get 4 or 5 groups in every single one of the Exopolitics World Net countries, we'll have 100 informal groups meeting, say, maybe on a monthly basis or overnight. So that is going to be put in play, and very soon. Hopefully, once I get back to Los Angeles, I've got about 5 days to come out. But this could be interesting. Again, we must build the exopolitical network so that the public awareness and preparation for disclosure is the biggest possible as we approach this coming event. Little extrapolation to think that the United States will still be the initial disclosure nation, but that is not a certainty anymore, and we have to consider the possibility that one of these other nations are going to do it. I mentioned 5 leading candidates. The UN is not a factor, unfortunately, because the UN has not been allowed to become an appropriate international body. In my view, it was created during the Cold War and not reformed after the Cold War ended. It is I guess you could say, a stopgap measure that was created during the Cold War, which no longer is needed and hasn't been reformed. So the UN's not there for us. So that means a country is going to have to start. The U.S. is the likely candidate, and until something changes, we will assume that the U.S. would be the first, which makes that Barack Obama, barring something dramatic, would be the disclosure president.
You know, one thing that you said is very interesting to me, and I never even thought about this, is all the countries in the world had a reason. I thought it was just a singular reason why everybody together as a whole did not disclose. But in each country, you had mentioned that they had various reasons depending on the countries. And can you go into that at all? Like, why? right, Steve. So what are you getting that's new? Anything?
Well, the last 36 days I've been on a tour of Australia, starting in Perth, and we finished up last night in Brisbane. Actually, not in Brisbane, Warwick, outside of Brisbane, about 2 hours. And it's been a productive time, and the interest in the subject in Australia is excellent, equal to the U.S., frankly, though it's a smaller population.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had good turnouts. We've had interest in the upcoming events and what's happening. So I'm enthusiastic about it, and I think made some excellent contacts down here. So that's the newest thing for Paradigm Research Group is a first-time visit to Australia and the interest in the many Australians for resolving this issue as soon as possible.
Right. So what do you think as far as the country as a whole? Are they more open to disclosure, would you say, or have they released more information than the United States?
Australia has held its materials very close, certainly closer than France or Britain, or reasons why they did not want the knowledge of the ET issue to be accepted as fact. So it worked out pretty well for the United States. But more and more countries are breaking ranks with this policy. And it now looks like the U.S. has no choice but to disclose, or another nation will do it for it. You have a disclosure race. There are 5 countries at the top of the list that could preempt the United States' prerogative here. The 5 include Brazil, France, the United Kingdom, Russia, and Communist China.
Mm-hmm. So, in my estimation here, with all the countries that are in the world, do you feel that it's going to be a larger country? Like you still feel that the U.S. is going to be the forefront in this thing? Is that right?
Well, it's a reasonable extrapolation. The truth embargo has been around a long time. The U.S. has led that embargo.
Mm-hmm.
While the other nations are taking some measures, they have not preempted the U.S. So it's a reasonable, a number of other countries, because of its close relationship to the U.S., particularly the relationship between their intelligence communities. There is a lot of cooperation involving facilities in the central part of Australia. And I think the Australian government has been aware of the ET issue, certainly from the beginning as well. So I don't expect anything shocking to come out of Australia for these reasons. But as you probably know, since 2000, we've had quite a few countries that are taking measures which are putting pressure on the truth embargo.
Mm-hmm. So what is your feeling as of late? Like, I know you've been doing this for several years, and do you think now is as good a time as any that the countries or some other country rather than the United States, or do you actually feel that the United States is going to come out first? What's your thought with that?
Most likely initial nation to make a move would be still the U.S. The truth embargo was initiated by the U.S. with the cooperation of its World War II allies. The Soviet Union and Communist China had their own.
Why would China want to keep that information from their particular population?
Well, that was the truth embargoes had the good fortune that the 2 major non-Western powers, the Soviet Union and in China, Red China, Communist China, had no real interest in revealing the ET presence because their ideological control state. Their existence was based on a complete fidelity of citizens to the party line, the icons of the party, the leaders, what have you. So introducing the truth of an ET presence to citizens in such a situation was going to loosen that control dramatically. And so they had no interest in doing it. But ironically, since the Cold War has now been over 17, or rather 19 years or more, and the Communist China has become a major world economic power and has its own space program now, and with satellites in space.